Hello, everybody, and welcome to Central Park. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Ryan, and I'm, of course, a guide for the Central Park Conservancy. I want to thank you so much for making this such a wonderful year for us, allowing us to bring the park to you in so many different ways, continuing our in-person tours, but of course, launching a lot of virtual programming, some longer 45-minute virtual tours through the park, as well as our lovable, famous 15-minute weekly walks every Wednesday at 12:30. We've again had so many wonderful walks over about the past 2 years, and so many different high points that we really want to celebrate those today. So we have a really special weekly walk for you where we're going to actually be highlighting all of, or not all of, but a handful of the weekly walks we've taken over this past year. We have, again, so many different wonderful walks. I think we're up to about 75 to almost 100 walks over the past 2 years. So there's so many different areas in the park to really enjoy and to check out. And of course, we're going to highlight a couple of my favorites that we could have seen through the past year or so. It was very hard to select some of these, so I definitely had to make some tough decisions. But we're going to check out one walk from each month of this past year, taking us through all 4 seasons and checking out a diverse collection of different landscapes. Once again, thanks to everybody for supporting us here at the Central Park Conservancy. Today on our little weekly walk, we're actually going to be together for about 30 minutes, but I'm going to hold you up a little bit longer than our typical 15-minute weekly walk because I do have a lot of photos to show today. Of course, a lot of really great walks to choose from, so I had to put in as much as I possibly could fit. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us on today, December 29th, as we highlight this past year of 2021 with some of the great weekly walks we've been able to take. Now, as always, we want to thank you again for supporting us here at the Central Park Conservancy. We're the nonprofit private organization that's been taking care of Central Park since 1980. Our mission being to preserve and celebrate Central Park as a sanctuary from the pace and pressures of city life, enhancing the enjoyment and well-being of all. As we take our year in review weekly walk today, we are using Zoom. So again, if you do want to share a favorite memory, please use the chat feature and let us know if you have any favorite walks that you've attended or any favorite memories from this past year. If you do have any questions, please use the Q&A feature, and my colleague Alan will be on the back end answering any questions you might have. Last thing you'll see pop up is I have one poll I want to launch throughout the walk today, but I also have a few questions I want to ask you and hopefully have you write in some responses in the chat. So you can also use the chat to answer some of those questions, as well as check for different links that'll be dropped by Alan for upcoming programs and cool things to check out. Now, without any further ado, let's jump into our year in review weekly walks. Again, so many amazing walks, it was really difficult to choose, but I decided to pick one from each month and really take us through a diverse collection of landscapes that we've explored here in Central Park. Now, all these photos you'll see, of course, were, like most weekly walks, taken here in the park during their respective times, with some historical photos being accessed through various databases like the Museum of the City of New York, the New York Public Library, and the Central Park Archives. The first walk I decided to highlight a little bit of is from our January walk on January 27th, 2021 of Fort Fish with Ian. Hopefully Ian is doing well at the City Parks Foundation, and he gave us quite a few great walks as we explored through the park this past year. This walk is always a really fun one to take because a lot of people don't make it to this area, and it takes you by some really amazing different landscapes. On our walk of Fort Fish, Ian gave us some really cool highlighting views atop some of the large rocky cliffs of the north end of the park. In this one, we can actually look over towards the east, viewing near the Conservatory Garden, another really beautiful, really 3 gardens in one that we can find up in this northern landscape of the park, very close to Fort Fish. You also gave us some really cool historical looks on photos like the greenhouses from Conservatory Garden. Conservatory really is actually a word meaning a kind of large greenhouse or structure. So really, this is where Conservatory Garden gets its name from. These original buildings were put up there around 1899, and they did survive until about the 1930s. The Conservatory Garden that we really kind of know about today would start to open around 1937. Of course, we can't see these greenhouses anymore, but this blast from the past is always fun. We also learned about some other historical that once existed here, like Mcgowan's Tavern. This was once a tavern operated by Catherine Mcgowan, a widow of Daniel Mcgowan, and operated with her son Andrew. They operated this for quite some time, originally purchasing it around 1766. It would be utilized during the Revolutionary War by a lot of generals, as well as turn into a nice rest stop for people traveling on the nearby Kingsbridge Road. We also learned where some of these landscapes are today, or rather what they turned into today, such as this area that once held Mcgowan's Tavern, today being the Mount, a recycling and composting area here in Central Park. One of the coolest things we saw in this walk was, of course, the Andrew Haswell Green Bench. Andrew Haswell Green being a city planner and really gentleman responsible for the Natural History Museum, the Metropolitan Museum, as well as Central Park. He's honored up here with this bench, which also celebrates him as being the father of Greater New York, helping to unify New York City, and in which we see 5 maple trees being set and planted just behind this tree to honor each borough of New York City. One of the last cool things I found about this walk was the way Ian was able to take us through multiple seasons in one photo, looking at this ginkgo tree during the winter, but jumping back to what this tree looked like in the summertime. And of course, giving us some of our favorite seasonal change, autumn, when we get that tree starting to get its nice golden yellow color. And I love the way we get these pictures overlaid atop one another, almost perfectly matching up in this landscape, giving us that beautiful before and after. Certainly a lot of beauty in this Fort Fish walk that Ian took us on in January. But moving right ahead, we can see how quickly the seasons change, coming into February, into what was arguably my favorite walk to take you on. The reason this walk was so wonderful for me is because, pretty obvious reasons, we got to walk around in the middle of a big snowstorm. And the amount of snow coming down was just incredible. It also added really just such beauty to every little angle we look. It was hard to pick photos from this one because every single photo was so amazing. And walking on fresh snow rather than a concrete path was really something that we seldom get to experience in the park, but something that is just so immersive of an experience. As we continued walking through the park, we saw some of the landscapes completely change, like one of my favorite little summer houses in the park, the Dean Cottage. This Dean summer house is one of about 3 wooden structures that we can find still in the park. Wooden summer houses, rather, but really beautiful, especially during this winter season. And one of my favorite things to see along this walk is, of course, not only people, but animals enjoying the weather, like some of my favorite visitors to Central Park, some of the canine companions that get to utilize some of these nice little meadows and lawns. And on this walk, we not only saw living dogs, but also the most famous dog immortalized here in Central Park, Balto. Probably the most ideal conditions for a Siberian Husky, nice, cold, and snowy. And this was probably my favorite picture of Balto that I've ever taken, but seeing Balto probably as happy as he could ever be with that snow falling on his face. Balto, again, being a Siberian Husky that in January of 1925 made a very daring serum run along with several other sled dog teams, taking serum to combat a diphtheria outbreak in Nome, Alaska, and transporting serum and vaccines from Nenana, Alaska over to Nome, Alaska, traversing 700 miles in blizzard-like conditions. We can also see Balto being the only figure to be immortalized by a statue here in Central Park that was actually at the unveiling. We can see this photo, one of the historic photos coming from Getty Images, featuring Balto himself, as well as the sled dog team handler, Gunnar Kassan. But really cool to see these, again, present and past photos and experience the park during some really different conditions. And to order to end this walk, I thought it was only fitting to make use of some of the really nice packing snow we had and look at some, or make a little bit of a fun, kind of enlightening thing for Central Park. Rather than make a snow person, make a little wording here. And certainly I think this captures a lot of our sentiments for Central Park. As we continue into March, we're coming up to Turtle Pond, a mid-park landscape that's one of the smaller and more quaint water bodies that you'll find of the about 7 or so here in Central Park. Certainly a favorite of some people for, of course, a lot of the visitors that we can typically, or a lot of the residents of Turtle Pond that we can typically see in the warmer months. Looking over from the Belvedere Castle Plaza, we get a beautiful view of Turtle Pond. And as we walked around in the wintertime, it was fun to share some secrets of this landscape that some people don't really realize, such as Turtle Pond Plaza. It might just look like a bunch of stones, but it's actually one of the hidden mosaics here in the park. While we think, when we think of mosaic, we might immediately jump to the imagined mosaic at Strawberry Fields, but this one always sticks out to me because of its natural connection. There's actually an image hidden within this mosaic, and that image is of a turtle. We can see a turtle's back and its shell, as well as its head, arm, and legs sticking out, created from this Manhattan schist stone plaza. A really cool little hidden secret to find in this landscape. We also got some beautiful firsthand wildlife encounters as we're walking through the Turtle Pond landscape, seeing a bunch of our visitors from the north, Canada geese, flying overhead in that very famous flying V. Really cool to see some of these birds fly directly over us and luckily not let anything down on top of our heads. So we did stay dry for this and got a couple cool pictures and views of these birds flying over. One of the last things that's always cool to do on these walks, especially during the different seasons, is to compare what it looked like when we visited this landscape last. And when we came by here in February, we were able to take a look back, or I'm sorry, rather in March, we're able to take a look back and see what this landscape looked like over the summer months, taking a nice flashback to when everything was very broccoli-like and green. Even the water, as we've seen algae bloom occurring here. Of course, during the next month of April, it's hard to think of springtime and not think of the reservoir, or specifically some of the immaculate cherry blossom trees that surround the Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis Reservoir. While this reservoir may not be used for water supply for New York City's drinking water anymore, it still provides great use for a lot of aquatic wildlife, as well as for people looking to recreate around the running track surrounding this reservoir. But during the springtime, it transforms into something a little different. On this springtime walk, we were greeted by so many beautiful blooms, flowers, and trees coming in. My favorite probably is the Eastern Redbud, which has this kind of almost little slipper looking or chili pepper rather, kind of looking flower that comes out. And we can also see this tree having a really cool effect. It does something called cauliflory, something that cherry blossoms also do, meaning it'll bud out of its trunk and woodier stems rather than just out of the branches, adding a fun little look to this tree, especially with its bright pink and red colors. As we made our way down, we also saw some moving wildlife exhibiting itself in the park, such as one of my favorite warblers to see around, a palm warbler. This photo that we can see popping up wasn't taken by myself, as these birds can be pretty difficult to photograph, sitting in the branch for one moment and then the next, taking a quick dive to get some more insects. Certainly a fun little visitor that stops by in the spring and fall that we had the pleasure of seeing on this walk. As we made our way a little bit closer to the reservoir, we came during the prime time for cherry blossoms, seeing all of the beautiful Yoshino cherry blossoms coming into bloom and completely transforming this landscape into a very whimsical Japanese garden. These plants are really amazing. They were originally gifted around 1910 to New York, but unfortunately the first batch delivered would be infected. We would see eventually replacements coming in 1912, which would also happen to be when Washington, D.C. would receive their first shipment of cherry blossoms, starting the Washington, D.C. Cherry Blossom Festival, and of course, bringing some cherry trees to New York City. We do see some of these trees being rumored to potentially be about the 1912 plantings. As we move through, we can get, of course, a lot of these cherry blossoms up close and personal, giving us plenty of beautiful views and pictures to see along the way. And of course, we're not the only ones enjoying it during this walk. As we do wrap around the reservoir, we also see some beautiful architecture, like the probably largest concentration of cast iron bridges in the park. There's 3 of them surrounding the reservoir. This is my favorite on the northwest end. It's bridge number 28, otherwise known as the Gothic Bridge, having some beautiful Gothic architecture. That white color really balances the landscape, and it's different shapes and kind of twists and turns, adding a little bit of whimsy to our walk on the bridle path. As we continue down to May, we're continuing through springtime, enjoying those warm weather days as The park is really lighting up in color, and it's certainly becoming a lot more green. During this time, I wanted to take us through a walk of Shakespeare Garden. And Shakespeare Garden, Conservatory Garden, really any garden in the park is going to be immaculate during the springtime season. Probably one of the best times to visit these gardens. And as we come through, we could see some of my favorite blooms commencing, like giant allium. Giant allium, also known as giant onion, but really amazing blooms, especially when we get a little up close and personal and see the detail amongst these really just almost hundreds of little flowers blooming all over the place, adding a little bit of nice color to our walk through Shakespeare Garden. And of course, all of the plants we see throughout here, which are getting nicely pollinated from honeys and other various pollinating insects, are all found in different works from Shakespeare. Every plant in here, of course, mentioned in some type of short story, sonnet, play, or poem by Shakespeare. And we only see about 100 species, while Shakespeare mentioned well over about 200. As we walk through this garden, we can take a flashback to what it looked like in its humble beginnings. Originally starting in the early 1900s, being a garden planted with plants from Shakespeare's works, but originally being called Garden of the Heart. This was originally started by Edmund Bronk Southwick, who was an entomologist working in the very close by Swedish Cottage, which we actually can see pictured on the right here, just behind some of these trees. Thanks to him, we'd see this garden taking shape, and in 1916, we'd see it being renamed Shakespeare Garden on what was the bicentennial of Shakespeare's passing. As we jump out of Shakespeare Garden and start making our way into the summer months, we get to June. And here in June, we visit a landscape that is probably more seldom visited in the park. It's one that, unless you're going to play tennis, you probably haven't really visited before. So coming through this landscape, it was really interesting to be able to take people through areas of the park that we normally might not go to, especially again, if we're not going here to play tennis. As we came through this walk, we were able to see some really up close and personal details of the tennis building, which I had never been in before. Going in there, you were able to see the small tennis shop, as well as see some really cool things like some restringing of rackets done by some of the professionals from the New York City Parks Department who work here. Seeing some of these up close details was really cool, as well as looking back to how far we've come. We would see, of course, tennis and a lot of different lawn games being played early on. Of course, being played on the lawns, as hard courts would become popular till about the mid 1900s or so. We do see a lot of lawns like this here around North Meadow being utilized for early games of tennis. You can also see, I love seeing the different outfits, as well as, of course, early dogs here in the park. As we continue by, we can see again how far the courts have come. Today, utilizing different types of clay courts traditionally for many of the hard courts that we'll find throughout here. These different clay courts, of course, changed the game up pretty drastically from the grass courts that used to be used, which would keep a much lower bounce and allow for more of a volley play rather than for more of a bounced racket play. As we made our way north of the tennis courts, we found ourselves in another popular recreational landscape, the North Meadow ball fields. Some of the largest collection of baseball diamonds can be found up here, and we'll also see this area being used for plenty of other sports, such as flag football, soccer, and various lawn games by schools and camp organizations. As we made our way down more, we of course saw a lot of recreation and sports on this tour today. And as we come up to the North Meadow Recreation Center, we come up to a heap of basketball courts, as well as free basketballs and products that can be rented out from this facility. Of course, we see plenty of people playing basketball, but we also see a lot of people playing a much more traditional activity, handball. Handball as well as racquetball are famously played over here in the North Meadow courts, as well as almost every single New York City park. It's really cool on these walks to be able to highlight really the past and present and see how kind of history as well as almost art and life imitate each other and repeat themselves. As we can see this photo from the early 1900s of some women playing handball, and then flash to the present over 100 years later, seeing some people play some handball and racquetball today. Really amazing to see these same courts and walls in use as they were over 100 years ago. As we come into July, making our way into the deeper months of summer, we come to some different landscapes that a lot of people don't typically have the opportunity to make it to. As we come up to this, I do want to launch one poll that I have for the tour today, which is just to see how many walks we've attended. See if you're some weekly walk veterans. We'll see if this is anybody's first walk, but again, once you vote in this, you can end the results. I know the numbers and the gaps are pretty large there, so if you happen to know like how many specific walks you've seen or attended, you can let us know in the chat. Of course, feel free to take a rough estimate. I think at this point, we've had about probably 75 to 100 walks that have been commenced. I believe this year alone, we've had about 45 walks or so, give or take one or two. And then of course, we've had almost a full year before this of doing weekly walks. So at this point, we're up to about 90 walks or so. And it's been a very fun ride so far. As we make our way into July, we're visiting the Great Hill, which Jose took us through. As we explored the Great Hill, we got some beautiful views of the third highest point in Central Park. As we make our way around the Great Hill or towards the Great Hill, because we have to climb it first, Jose brought us by some really cool new species that we'll be able to see grow if they survive here in the park, which I'm sure trees like this bald cypress will. But seeing these trees that can grow well over 150 feet as they're starting nice and small, giving us something to see grow and prosper here in Central Park. And Jose taught us a bit about a few different trees on this walk, like oak leaf hydrangea, as well as a favorite species of mine that we can see pictured here, sassafras. Sassafras is not only fun to say, but also fun to see because it has 3 different style leaves that make it pretty easy to identify. We can see a kind of round oval shaped leaf, one that I like to refer to as a mitten, and then this one over here with 3 points that I always refer to as Star Trek, an easy way to remember the 3 style leaves that you'll find on sassafras trees. As we move ahead, we can see also some historic depictions of these landscapes and areas that Jose provided for us, such as this illustration from 1857, which shows a view from the Great Hill looking east. You might notice it says view from Mount Prospect, because that's originally what this landscape was called before Central Park was created, eventually getting the rename the Great Hill. Of course, the landscape may have changed quite a lot today. Now we do see towering trees blocking most of the view, with a lot of buildings as well towering along the edge line of the park. But of course, it's always fun to think about how far we've come. This used to be at one point a British encampment around the time of the Revolutionary War, but today you'll find it used for a lot more lighthearted events, such as jazz events on the Great Hill. Certainly a really beautiful landscape that not many people make it to. And speaking of landscapes that not many people may make it to, or maybe have not had the opportunity to, as we make our way into August, we can visit a landscape that was famously closed for quite some time. Before we jump into the Hallett, I'll end that poll though and share the results. And I see that we have a lot of people coming in, about 25, 50, 75, few people here in their first 5 or so walks. Certainly really cool. Also, we're kind of surprised to see we have about 10 people that are here for their first ever weekly walk. Well, thank you so much for joining us for your first weekly walk, or for your 25th, 50th, 75th, or for all the walks. Again, we really love doing these walks. It's really fun to even be able to highlight some of the past ones we've done. But as we've made our way through half the year about so far, we can already see we have a lot of really amazing walks that we've attended and that we really have. And again, you can always watch these on our YouTube channel, as they're posted typically about a week after they are commenced. Now, as we make our way into the Hallett, which Ian took us through back in August, we can visit this landscape, which was famously closed for quite some time. Originally, this landscape was known as the Promontory and was really just kind of a landscape that you would look at. Promontory really meaning a kind of area of land that juts out into a water body, the water body being the pond that is located around this landscape. As we made our way through the Promontory, which would originally or eventually get closed off around the 1930s, not to be reopened until about the 2010s, we'd eventually see it in the meantime being renamed around 1986, the Hallett Nature Sanctuary, after George H. Hallett, a philanthropist who donated money to help clean up this area and fix up this otherwise abandoned landscape. We can see, of course, beautiful flowers on our walks through this area, such as sweet pepper bush. This is actually a plant that's in the mint family, but really nice to see its beautiful flowers blooming, as well as some bumblebees helping to polish out this area. Or actually, this looks like it might be a carpenter bee, rather. It has a smooth black abdomen rather than fuzzy, which is how you can separate a carpenter bee from a bumblebee. As we move a little bit further into the Hallett, we can see some of the really amazing and beautiful rock carvings that we have throughout this area. These carvings coming from giant glaciers moving over this area, specifically the Wisconsin glacial sheet, which I believe was about 10,000 years ago or so. This really moving other stones and different things around this area, carving out big pockets in the rock, which today are used for some little waterways, cascade water along the southwestern edge of the Hallett Nature Sanctuary. As we make our way through, plenty of wildlife encounters in any woodland of the park. And of course, there are 3 different woodlands to explore and get close encounters. But anywhere we go, I'm sure we can find squirrels coming up and begging for food. As we make our way through, we can also notice that sometimes, again, the park is not always so perfect. Of course, the park is a living, breathing thing that changes. Sometimes the park may get damaged. We might see trees fall. And sometimes we don't always have access to every single pathway. I think it's really cool on these weekly walks that we're able to highlight the park really as it is, not glamorizing the park in any way, but showing you the park as it exists. And again, the park isn't always perfect, and we don't always have access to every single area in the park. As we make our way up to an open area, we can visit a high point in the Hallett, one that does a beautiful job of giving us a view, but also blocking out some of the surrounding buildings, as we can see to our right. This Hackberry Hill area is a really amazing landscape to enjoy in the Hallett, certainly a favorite of mine. As we make our way into September, we're getting towards the autumn and fall time, and we're making our way into another woodland, the largest in the park, the 40-acre Northwoods, which I took you through in September. Coming through this landscape, we see just an immense amount of leafy green. And as we start to make our way into this dense woodland, we can enjoy some of the reason these landscapes look so beautiful, namely being the volunteers of the Central Park Conservancy. Along with our operations staff, volunteer groups help immensely in weeding out different areas, keeping them natural, preventing invasive and non-native species from taking over, as well as doing plentiful other things like handing out maps, working in visitor centers, and really keeping this park healthy, thriving, and clean and green. Conservancy, of course, formed because of volunteers, and they're really the lifeblood as to why the park continues to look so beautiful throughout every season. As we make our way up, we come to a landscape we visited before, the oldest structure to be found in Central Park, the Blockhouse. There used to be 3 created throughout the northern end of Manhattan, but this would be the only one to continue to exist. And we can, of course, see it getting some nice treatment from the volunteers and operations, helping to weed out and open up that view to capture this picturesque ruin. As we make our way up, we had a really special encounter up here as we were able to actually go into the Blockhouse on this walk today. It was really cool because typically there's no access available to this building. But we were able to take everybody inside and show us, again, not too much to see, but see this inside of this historic Blockhouse building. We've also been really lucky this past year to be able to open the Blockhouse up to the public in person as well as virtually, bringing people here in person during the Open House New York events and allowing people to step inside the Blockhouse for themselves. But whether you got to walk in person or virtually, still a really cool treat to be able to experience this. And as we make our way out of the Blockhouse, we can, of course, enjoy some of my more favorite elements of the park, rather than the architecture, the wildlife. We can see this little bird silhouette standing just on the branch in the middle of the photo. And that little bird that we're going to see there is another migratory species that passes through in the spring as well as the fall time. They are going to be American redstarts. We can see the photo on the left of this bird flailing out its back wings, giving us some nice color patterns. And if I give us a better photo from Google Images, we can see what that bird looks like and what it's specifically doing in that photo on the left. An American male redstart branching out its beautiful orange and black and white plumage, maybe helping to attract a mate during this summer to fall season as we're walking through the park. As we make our way through, we come to other nice little quaint landscapes like the Wildflower Meadows that border much of the Northwoods. These meadows become really just immersively beautiful during the summer months when a lot of native wildflowers are starting to bloom. We're going to see different flowers like cutleaf cone flowers here, as well as other types of sunflowers adding yellow to the patches, as well as plants like obedient plant, another type of plant in the mint family, which is adding a little bit of a lavender color to this landscape. Balancing out that yellow. As we make our way out of the Northwoods, we come to some more architectured areas as we make our way to the Mineral Springs section of Central Park in October. Mineral Springs being a pretty interesting piece of Central Park's history. Mineral Springs exist as a Le Pain cafe, a little area to stop and get some food here in the park and refuel before you do a lot of walking, as you typically do in New York in Central Park. As we started our walk, we learned a little bit about something we might not often talk about, the walls surrounding the park. These sandstone walls are made in an interesting design. At one point, there were going to be some more grand sidings and entrances to the park, but instead these walls were adopted. Nice and simple, but still beautiful. That sandstone looking a little nice and kind of worn down, matching up with the tone of the park, as well as having those pointed kind of pyramid tops, which one reason is to help with things like snowfall, helping to reduce the amount of snow that'll build up on there, as well as like this picture in the middle, see, to prevent maybe runoff of water and flooding coming over the wall. So a couple interesting designs with that little pointed top. We're also able to see an example of that wall back in the late 1800s with this photo, which would have come from about the 1890s or so. This photo actually being a view from the Dakota, looking a little south, but still seeing that border wall, which would have been implemented by this time. As we make our way through the park, we get to see some favorite activities of mine, one that some people may not have heard of before, such as geocaching. Geocaching is always a favorite of mine. It's basically like a worldwide scavenger hunt using different types of specific GPS points to find a small, medium, or potentially large hidden package. Within these, you'll typically find the most common item, a logbook, to leave a little note about your splendors finding the geocache. And here, of course, on our weekly walk, I decided to leave a little note commemorating our October 20th weekly walk to Mineral Springs. So if anybody finds this geocache located near Riftstone Arch, you can find this page yourself. As we made our way further down, we of course came to the highlight of our walk during October, or during this week of October, which was Mineral Springs. This once existed as a mineral water bar here in the mid area of the park. During this time or prior to, we do see, of course, really water sources not being too common or apparent in New York, using a lot of wells and different streamways that often became contaminated with yellow fever and cholera due to animal runoff and improper sewer systems, which didn't really exist yet. So we do see this water bar allowing different various types of mineral water and even chemically enhanced water from different regions of the world. This was a popular establishment for many people, especially to come during the mornings. We'd see a lot of various different types of immigrant groups actually really adopting this as well, as a lot of Jewish and German immigrants would actually spend time here early on. We would see this also transforming and becoming a little bit different of a landscape, really being utilized in the morning times for people to come get water, as well as listen to the band that would perform between about 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. We see this landscape transforming a little bit present day, as today the lawn just nearby Mineral Springs, typically known as Frisbee Hill, is one that we often see utilized for our film festival here in Central Park. This photo from about 2018 shows a bunch of people crammed over out of the landscape, enjoying one of the several screenings of movies that'll occur over the autumn season. As we snap back into current time, we'll come to November. And as we come to the last 2 months of these weekly walks, we can highlight some cool little events like in November that occur specifically here near the park. A lot of really fun events occur, such as Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, but certainly a very electric time for all of New York is during the New York City Marathon. And we luckily took a walk through the park, stopping by a very historic, famous landscape known as Sheep Meadow, getting its name from the sheep that once inhabited this landscape, but today serving as really Manhattan's backyard, providing a great picnic and sunbathing area for a lot of people to enjoy. As we make our way out, we can see how this area transforms and becomes a little bit noisier, but in a good way during this season, as it becomes the finish line for the New York City Marathon. Seeing here the big marathon finish line being constructed, and eventually turning into something a little like this, really becoming a very magical area in the park. Again, so much energy in New York in all during this time of the year. And we also got to see some really cool things as we come down early and really set the scene before as everything's getting set up. We get to see the podium before it's really officially set up and before any winners are standing on it, as well as see one of the gentlemen who helped start the New York City Marathon, Fred LeBeau, the only statue that actually gets relocated once a year to come down here and sit at the finish line for the New York City Marathon. This area was really cool, and as we walked around, we got to actually walk up on some of these bleachers and the grandstands and get a general view of what you might see during race day. Looking down on the people running just below us, having traversed over about 25 miles to make it to this point and eventually end their run here in Central Park. This is, of course, what we can imagine or see as we stand down here on race day, seeing the runners make their way through this section of the park, enjoying the beautiful foliage that exists just behind us. As we come to the final month of the year, December, as we start to wrap up this month, we can look at one walk we took just a few weeks ago, one that's very appropriate for this time of the year and for Central Park in general. It's really cool to end with this walk because this landscape is really how Central Park began. Being the first landscape to be created in Central Park, the lake. We would see this landscape opening up around 1858 during the winter time. So very appropriate to have this be our last winter walk. Coming through this area, you would have really come and enjoyed a very famous recreational activity. But along the way of this beautiful walk, we were able to indulge in some of the beautiful architecture sitting around it, such as Ladies' Pavilion, one of the most beautiful little shelters in the park, a cast iron one, and one that once was located down near Columbus Circle. Ladies' Pavilion was once an ornate trolley stop, but we would eventually see it being relocated into Central Park once the main monument would be erected where the trolley stand exists in this photo. But a beautiful addition to the Ladies' Pavilion area of Central Park, and one that looks beautiful as we walk around the lake. As we look back on this walk, we were able to view different areas that no longer exist in the park, like the ladies' skating pond. This area would eventually be sealed off and really find no remnants of it after 1930. But of course, looking back on old photos, we can remember this area that was once a more private section for women to participate in ice skating. As we make our way around the lake, of course, plenty of current beautiful architecture, some that have been here since the beginning, like the beautiful Bow Bridge, which would find its way around this area in the early 1860s, being the second oldest cast iron bridge in America, and one that has a beautiful, graceful bow going over the water, giving us some beautiful reflective views, as we can see here. As we look back on the lake, we can remember what it originally was created for, ice skating. As we see ice skating occurring on this landscape back in around 1858 as the park would start to open. The most popular Christmas gift to receive in 1858, ice skates. And we see immense amounts of people coming up to the park to utilize its first open landscape and use it for its real purpose, for ice skating. That's right, the lake was made to be really a natural ice skating rink for people visiting the park. As we come to the end of this walk, we're able to see something that truly honors the lake's original purpose or creation, again, to be an ice skating rink. As we can see, these ice skates carved into the Bethesda Terrace area of the Bethesda Terrace. Seeing these skates in their really original versions that used to tie onto the bottom of the boot, but one that show a hidden secret of this landscape, one that a lot of people don't realize. And of course, there's a tremendous amount of hidden secrets and hidden beauty to discover in Central Park. We're so happy that we've been able to take you through the park and all these different landscapes through every season of the year, from spring to summer to fall to winter, getting to experience some of the different weather conditions firsthand, like walking through the wintry walks of the Dean, coming through the gardens in the spring, seeing the woodlands in the summer, and of course, seeing beautiful landscapes like the pool around the fall time. There's really no bad time to explore Central Park, and we're so thankful that you're willing to explore it with us during every season of the year, enjoying the beauty, the good, the bad, everything that Central Park has to offer. And again, we love doing these walks, and we couldn't do them without your support. So thank you so much for attending and for supporting us here at the Conservancy by making donations, by coming on tours, by just caring and respecting for the park. You're certainly helping to preserve this park's beauty and history. And of course, we've taken a lot of walks and we're not done yet. There's still plenty more walks to be done. And we, of course, are doing plenty of different events. We do have plenty of in-person events coming up. And if you do check the chat, you can actually find some links for upcoming programs, such as our Winter Wonderland virtual tour, which I'll be taking you on tomorrow, as well as some of our in-person winter tree tours featuring the Authoros pinetum, a favorite landscape of mine, especially during the winter time. So whether you want to come virtually or in person, there's plenty of different options to check out. You can find a few of those in the chat box or of course on our website at centralparknyc.org. As we come to the end of our walk, I will be keeping this open to answer any last-minute questions that you might have. But again, I want to thank you so much for participating in these walks, for making them special for ourselves and hopefully for you as well. And again, supporting us here at the Central Park Conservancy, allowing us to keep this park looking clean and green for many generations to come. Thank you so much for joining us. And I hope everybody has a very, very happy, safe, and healthy new year. We look forward to seeing you for more virtual and in-person programs in 2022. So cheers, everybody. Thank you again so much. And from all of us here at the Central Park Conservancy, stay safe, be well, and we'll see you in 2022.